My name is Michael Ostrolenk, and I want to thank you all for coming to this transpartisan conversation we're having today. First, quick question. How many here have heard the word transpartisan? Please raise your hand.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Good. Well, I want to give some context for today's discussion. There are three avenues that we've been working in the transpartisan field in Washington, D.C. and nationally. Just to give you some background on all three, which will help you understand today's conversation. We've been doing, over the many years, transpartisan retreats, as an example of some of the activities, where we bring high-level conservative, libertarian, liberal, and progressive leaders together on 3-day retreats, professionally facilitated. Has anyone in this room either participated in one of those retreats or are familiar with those retreats? Cool. Rob, awesome. Well, there's three general purposes of those types of retreats. One is to humanize the political process. You got the opportunity to spend time with people from different political perspectives, get to know them as people, and see where their perspectives come from. The second is to find common ground. It's pretty amazing once you spend time with each other how much common ground there is, as opposed to if you watch the talking head shows, everyone just seems to be fighting about all these issues. But in reality, there is a lot of common ground. And the third, when you create this space, some new innovative ideas can emerge, and you can create the space in the body politic for these new innovative ideas to enter the body politic and at least be discussed, which is really important. A second area of activity in the transpartisan realm is coalition activities. And I'm sure many in this room have been involved in various types of transpartisan coalitions. I know everyone on this panel has. Some examples of transpartisan coalitions include an audit of the Federal Reserve. There's a great left-right, up-down coalition in support of the audit of the Federal Reserve. We have a coalition in opposition to E-Verify, Patriot Act reform, medical privacy, a whole host of issues where the left and the right, conservatives, libertarians, progressives, greens, liberals, all come together and serve a common set of principles, which is fantastic. And then we have these salons or discussions that we've been doing. And in this case, this is the third salon that we've done on this particular topic, generally speaking. And it's just the opportunity for us to come together from different perspectives on the political spectrum and have conversations about particular issues, engage in dialogue and debate. Dialogue in terms of trying to get to understand where we come from, and debate in terms of debating ideas. But a real debate, not just name-calling or kind of silly stuff, but actually having a real adult conversation. And we hope that this can be a model, or has been a model, for more conversations, because we think it's really important that we actually talk to one another. So what I'm going to do is just give you quickly a brief overview of the two panels we've done already. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kathryn Serkes. If you want to see the first one, it was actually covered by C-SPAN. If you do transpartisan, corporations, C-SPAN, you can watch it online. And we had folks from across the political spectrum talking about Americans as citizens, as consumers, and as employees, the different roles that Americans play in context of the corporate state. What's the relationship politically to the large corporations and to the political dynamic system that we live in today? The more recent one we did, which was just a few months ago, was slightly different. It was free markets versus the corporate state. And in that one, it was more of a conservative conversation, looking at, is it possible to support free markets, considering we have kind of the corporate state system that we've set up. And then we had friends on the left who kind of engaged in an expansive conversation, kind of challenging some folks on the right on free markets and what they meant. And that's kind of led to our conversation today, which Kathryn Serkes is going to moderate. And I'll actually turn it over to her to tell you more about the discussion today and to introduce us.
Right, thank you. I'm Kathryn Serkes, and I'm here representing, I have a grassroots group called Take Back Washington. I'm actually in Seattle, Washington. And let me run down quickly because you're staring at these people and probably wondering who they are. And as I speak, I'm just going to go from this side. Bruce Fein is a constitutional scholar and a Harvard grad, so this is homecoming for him, and his group is the American Agenda. Michael Ostrolenk has created this really unique organization called the Liberty Coalition, which is groups coming from across the political spectrum, really a transpartisan group, to look at civil liberties issues and privacy and a number of things. So what I didn't mention about Bruce is would you see his bio, he spent some time in the Justice Department in the Reagan administration, so that qualifies him as our conservative Republican, although you may not be so sure after you hear everybody speak. Michael kind of self-characterizes himself as more libertarian leaning, a constitutional government, limited government person. To this side, we have Jeffrey Clements, who is also from here, and Jeffrey has a group called Free Speech for People, and I'd also like to point out on the flyer that's in your program, it's Free Speech for People, not Free Speech Coalition. So if you want to check out the website, it's under Free Speech for People. Jeffrey he's another attorney. I'm sorry, we're heavy on the attorneys. I am not an attorney, thank you very much. Yes, that's why I'm here. He is also an attorney with the Attorney General's Office, formerly of the Attorney General's Office in Massachusetts, working on a lot of cases that had to deal with corporate entities, such as the tobacco litigation and some other things. But I think what's very key is that he has filed an amicus brief on the Citizens United election law case. So this is his area, and he has a great book coming out that isn't out. It's too bad we didn't have it here for you today. That's coming out. And it's corporations are not people. So we'll tell you about that too before we finish. And over here we have Jim Turner, another attorney from DC. But Jim is very interesting guy. He has a group called Citizens for Health that looks at health freedom issues and nutritional supplements and things like that, and kind of fighting up against the FD and government regulation. He is one of the original Nader's Raiders back in the 60s, and when he was very, very young boy. Really young. Very young. Really. And as an attorney, does a lot of regulatory issues and specializes in looking at the regulatory issues. Lots more about them. If you want to see bios, they're posted on the website. But I think those are kind of the things that are most important for you to know about us. And then I guess that I'm sort of, I jokingly sometimes call myself a conservatarian. So I guess I represent the Tea Party grassroots perspective here. So we've tried to have a broad spectrum of representation to discuss these questions. So the question today, we thought the logical next step is now that we've talked about corporations and the role of corporations, we've talked about this sort of government-corporate collusion. The next step, as Michael mentioned, is to talk about government and politics and corporations and how that relates to the constitutional. You've all been here this weekend to talk about a constitutional convention. So we're here to kind of wrap this up with a bow. What are the constitutional issues that we need to discuss when it comes to corporations? So there are some natural questions here that I think we're all asking from all sides of the table, and that is, what should be the involvement of corporations? Are we, the bottom line issue is the issue that Jeff has raised so well with Free Speech for People is, are corporations entitled to constitutional rights? Are corporations, here's how I like to ask the question, are corporations and all the subsets of corporations, that's for-profits, nonprofits, et cetera, are they entitled to the same inalienable constitutional rights as you and I are, as human beings, as we the people? And then if you believe that they are not entitled to those constitutional rights, what is the next step on that? What do we need to change? If you do believe that they are entitled to the constitutional rights, then what's the next step? And what do we need to change? I think that we probably have a pretty much consensus. Let me go ahead and ask the question. Would you, if you agree with this statement, raise your hand. Let's do this. Do you find that corporate influence on politics makes you feel that it diminishes your power as a citizen? Okay. I think let's start with that as our area of agreement. That's our place of agreement. Everyone here have agreement with that?
Well, I don't know whether it diminishes our power. Certainly the corporate influence is enormous, but we still retain our rights to speak.
Well, but Bruce, the question for them is, does it feel like that diminishes their power? So that we're asking about perceptions.
Well, it diminishes how I feel about it, like Mr. Bloomberg as an individual being wealthy, or Warren Buffett or others putting huge amounts of money into the campaign. It's less the corporate origin than that money dictates what goes on in politics that makes you feel diminished unless you're a multimillionaire.
Okay, so we have... Okay. Okay. So beyond, the question is beyond, and we should have an audience mic here, because we don't mind talking as we're talking. So let me tell you what we're going to do with format here, because we do want to encourage the participation. What we're going to do here is I wanted to kind of get us set up with the questions and talk about some of the things we're going to talk about. Then we're going to go down the line here with kind of a 1-minute opening from everyone to frame the issue in the way that they think we need to discuss it today. And then I'm going to pose some questions, and then we're happy to have you jump in, and there are microphones set up. So as Michael said, we're trying to have conversations about this. That's what we love about these salons, is we're having grown-up conversations instead of throwing party talking points at each other, and so we can find those common areas. So let's start out with that we have mostly agreement on the corporate influence, feeling that it diminishes us. So then our question for the day is, what should be the role of corporations in politics, and is there a difference? Some of the questions are, should there be a difference between for-profit corporations and nonprofit corporations? And we'll go through some scenarios. Let's start off with Michael.
For most of the work that I do, I try to ask some basic fundamental questions to myself as I think through the policy decisions I would take and what I would support, wouldn't support. And when it comes to this issue, my general consensus is that only human beings deserve or are entitled to inalienable rights given to you by God or in the nature of human beings, that corporations are creatures of the state precedes human beings, and therefore corporations, all corporations, unions, for-profit, nonprofits, do not deserve constitutional rights the same way that human beings would. Now, I believe in free markets, maximization of individual liberty. So with that said, although I don't think corporations, broadly speaking, deserve the same constitutional protections as individuals, I would like to see a different regime put in place that maximizes their capacity in the marketplace to act in their own self-interest. So I wouldn't want to restrict them, and I think that would be an area that my friends on the center left, and we could debate that. But just generally speaking, I would like to see a clear distinction made between individual human beings and corporations, and then we can have a debate on how much regulation is appropriate for the corporate area.
I think I'd have at least some disagreement there.
Bruce, can you stand by? Let everyone do their opening here first.
Sorry.
And we're going to go to Jeff, and then we'll come back to you.
I didn't know that was
I threatened to bring a cattle prod today for Bruce, because he's so passionate about this subject. So stand by a moment.
Thank you, Kathryn. Hello, everybody. I'm glad Bruce did get a word in before, so now I have a preview of what he's going to say. So I can cheat and say that it does matter. It's not just money. The idea of corporate rights and corporate power are a fundamental problem, in my view, and the view of thousands and thousands of people who have joined Free Speech for People and other organizations working to overturn Citizens United. It's not just money in politics bad as that problem is. It's the corporate entity usurping human rights, whether you're conservative, liberal, independent, progressive, libertarian, whatever. Your rights are being diminished, taken, disregarded in favor of this new concept, and it is a new concept of corporate rights. So what I'd like to do really briefly is say why Free Speech for People launched on the day Citizens United was decided, why we are pushing all over the country the People's Rights Amendment, which would declare that our constitutional rights are the rights of human beings, people, that corporate entities, LLCs, any corporate entity created by the state as Michael and Kathryn both alluded to, whether nonprofit, for-profit. If it's a state-created entity, it is a state-created entity. It's not a human being. And I would hope that a shared premise among all of us in the room, whether you come from the right or the left or however where you come from, I think it's an American premise, is that rights, that our constitutional rights precede government. They proceed government. They come from God, or if you prefer, self-evident, as Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence. But they are rights that we have because we're human beings. They're not a gift from the government. And that's a fundamental distinction. Corporations, they're not associations of people. They're not groups. They are state-created entities. If we want to start a business, we want to start a not-for-profit corporation, we have to look to a state law, usually. There's federal laws of incorporation, much more rarely used. But a corporation doesn't exist in nature. Associations of people exist in nature. Groups of people exist. A corporation exists because Delaware or some other law passes a statute that has a whole bunch of benefits, limited liability, perpetual life, and so forth. And that's the fundamental distinction that we think is so important to bear in mind, that the court lost sight of in Supreme Court and in the Citizens United case by holding that corporations have the same rights as people. Now, I know on the right there may be less alarm about Citizens United, perhaps, among some, because the organization, Citizens United, was a not-for-profit conservative corporation that wanted to attack Hillary Clinton through a feature-length political advertisement while she was running for president. That violated the McCain-Feingold law because they wanted to do it in the time frame right before the election. I get that, and that's a hard case, I think. That's a hard free speech case. Can people in a not-for-profit corporation spend money to attack a very powerful senator who's running for president? That sounds like what we traditionally think of as free speech. Government shouldn't get in the way of that. But here's why those facts really don't matter anymore. The Citizens United decision, as opposed to the not-for-profit organization, didn't just decide that those people had a right to do that. What the Citizens United decision unequivocally said is that corporations have First Amendment rights that we, the people, can't restrict. So if it had been limited to that decision where, a conservative organization in Virginia wants to attack Hillary Clinton, I don't think we would be doing what we're doing. The problem with the decision is nobody now debates, does Goldman Sachs have the right to spend all the money they want on independent expenditure ads to control Congress and control the presidency, even control certainly localities and states? No question, according to Citizens United, the case. So that case gives rights to AIG, Exxon, Goldman Sachs, and it gives rights to global corporations. That's what we're dealing with now. It's no longer it's not about American business versus, regulation or how big our government should be or any of those things. It's really about our sovereignty as people and our own rights. And to give some examples, News Corporation, and I'm not picking on them because it's Fox News and a conservative group. I'd say the same thing if I had the data from MSNBC or something, but I don't have the data. But what I do have data for, News Corporation is a global corporation, as we know from the scandals going on in the UK right now about the phone hacking. They channeled $2 million minimum, that's what leaked out, we don't have disclosure, $2 million minimum into the November 2010 congressional elections. $1 million went to the Chamber of Commerce, tried to be laundered, it got exposed somehow. Another $1 million went straight to the Republican Governors Association campaign. Now, human being wants to give money to Republicans, I have no problem at all with that, obviously, comply with the law, but what is News Corporation? Apart from Rupert Murdoch, he's a naturalized American citizen now, so I won't pick on him, although he's from Australia originally. But the number 2 shareholder is the Kingdom Holding Company of Saudi Arabia. Now, and it's not just like number 2 way down the list with a few shares, it's $2 billion in shares. Now, if Prince Taloid, who runs the Kingdom Holding Company in Saudi Arabia, wanted to give money into our elections, flat out crime, as it should be. But if the corporation that he controls, in effect, with Rupert Murdoch, does it, it's not only not a crime, the Supreme Court says we're not allowed to make it a crime. And again, this is not about right, left. I don't want to pick on News Corp. Most of our big corporations that are the threat that we're talking about are global. They're not American anymore, whether they seem like it, like an Exxon or a Chevron Texaco or a Goldman Sachs. These are global entities tied into a global agenda. And that is what we need to be able to regulate. What the Supreme Court has said is we can't. We're not allowed to regulate it. So we've got a lot of arguments. I know Kathryn's trying to give me the hook here, so there's more time. So I'm going to just refer you
on the questions.
refer you to the freespeechforpeople.org website where the People's Rights Amendment is there when we need to overturn this case. It's not just money and politics, it's local control, it's our states' rights, it's all kinds of things where the left and the right can come together behind this amendment to, in our view, save our country.
And I would add as a postscript, the lead attorney for Citizens United, who was a former Solicitor General for the United States, was quite surprised at the extent of the ruling. They actually did not expect it to be as broad as it came out. They thought they were bringing a much narrower issue. So what I hear here is the issue of for-profit versus nonprofit may be something we want to talk about. And to Bruce.
I think it's incorrect to postulate that the Supreme Court has held that corporations and individuals are indistinguishable. The court has held that corporations are not citizens for purposes of the Privileges and Immunities Clause. Corporations don't have the right to vote. They have no right to plead the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. And even with regard to the free speech issue, what the court has said is not so much that the corporation is a person, but that if speech serves the purposes of the First Amendment, it'll be protected no matter who the speaker is, who's got the megaphone. So I don't think we're confronting a situation where the Supreme Court has ever held that corporations and human beings are the same. Now, that being said, I think that corporations are artificial creatures. I think they're a menace because limited liability encourages recklessness that gives us AIG and TARP and things of that sort. Other people have to accept full risk when they enter an enterprise. They make a bad decision, they pay for it all. So we, through the corporation, are creating an artificially reckless and precarious economy that should end. You can aggregate capital if it's needed for enterprise purposes like Lloyd's of London, through partnerships or joint enterprises. You don't need corporations in order to do that. And the one thing that to me suggests that corporations should be excluded from the political realm entirely as a matter of policy, and you could accomplish that simply by abolishing the corporate entity, and the Supreme Court has held that a death penalty for corporations is constitutional, is that the loyalty, the motivation of a corporation is one thing: make money. This is why Lenin said, the capitalists will sell us the rope by which we will hang them. Halliburton reincorporated. It's either Dubai or United Arab Emirates. General Motors and Ford were selling trucks and armaments to Adolf Hitler prior to World War II. Why do we want to involve people in the political domain when their entire summum bonum is make money, period? Nothing else deflects their attention. Indeed, the board of directors and their officials will tell you we would be guilty of malfeasance if we did anything other than seek profit maximization. Now, the founding fathers at Valley Forge were not talking about profit maximization as the goal of the republic. They thought that there were unalienable rights called life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that was the exclusive goal of government, not to make money. Although it has its advantages, Sam Johnson once quipped, a man is never as innocently occupied as when he is making money, so it does have that emollient on the social tumult. But we as a country, in my judgment, were not formed just to make money, unlike corporations. And I see the reason why we can exclude corporations from our political domain is because that's all they're about. They aren't about education and creating a culture that has any other objective or value like virtue or wisdom or magnanimity. Their value is just make money. That's their only soundtrack. They can't repeat anything else. Make money. To my mind, that is not what the United States should be about.
Okay. And for the final Opening remarks, Jim Turner.
Okay, let me just begin very quickly and say I buy into all of these statements. Corporations are an alternative form of organization for the system that we live in, and they are accumulating power at a vast rate that undermines the democratic principles that we are involved in as a culture. Just set that over here, and now I want to talk a little bit about transpartisan and the way one deals with that issue as I see it as a problem. Much of the governing class's approach from the last panel is to create the notion that the issues in this society are between something they call the left and something they call the right. My partner in author Laurie Chickering, who's a conservative, and I'm who considered her liberal or progressive, have written a book called Voice of the People, which is available here, The Transpartisan Imperative in American Life. It's a transpartisan analysis that we want to promote. The concept is that, let's just take Citizens United as an example. Citizens United was a debate about a law that was created by what the chairman of the last panel called the governing class. And you had somebody who was identified from the left, indeed the most liberal senator, and somebody from the right, one of the most conservative, McCain and Feingold, who created a governing class rule about campaign contributions. And they were immediately attacked by the National Rifle Association and the American Civil Liberties Union. We would call those a free right and a free left group. That coalition of free right and free left are the ones that brought the battle against Citizens United. There was a combined struggle going on there. Now, to analyze that as a left-right debate, I think really misleads us importantly. So the first principle that we've articulated on transpartisan in our book is that to think about our politics in terms of a matrix more than a spectrum or a continuum. What we have is a horizontal piece that is left, right, and then we have a vertical piece which is order, freedom. And they break out on almost every issue. You will find people who are order left and order right, and people who are free left and free right. And almost every issue that's of significance in the culture, you will find that the free left and the free right tend to unite together, and the order left and the order right tend to unite together, and they fight across that barrier. The free side of the movement tends to be the one that is most articulating what individual people feel are their rights, and the order group tends to be the one that articulates mostly for the institutions. The next step in that process is to understand that bipartisan is a small step in the right direction. Bipartisan compromises and balances. Transpartisan, we argue, integrates, takes things from the right and things from the left that are valuable to all people and merges them into a process that allows us to do an analysis that helps us sort out an issue. Finally, we would argue that this is something that goes on inside each individual. This boils down to there is no such thing as a conservative or a liberal. There are people who are more or less liberal on a given issue at a moment in time. A week later, they may have shifted. And each person at any given moment, on any given issue, falls on that matrix somewhere. So the big question is, how do you organize a way of dealing with something which is intrusive on our individual rights as corporations in that kind of an analysis? And our point is that the way that this country came into existence was the Declaration of Independence, which is a very strong statement on the free individual side of humanity. We followed that with the Constitution, which is a very strong statement on the side of institutions and the organized framework of the energy that comes from individual human beings. That was immediately followed by the Bill of Rights, which took the position that, yes, we need to have organized structures, but they have to be significantly limited by these principles that are in the Bill of Rights that say the institutions can only encroach on the individual this much. Any more than that is wrong. There's more of this individual versus institution dynamic going on through the American history, but just take it that far, and we would argue that the major thing that needs to be accomplished is that all of the restraints that are allegedly existent in the Bill of Rights on the American institutional government, all of those should be applied to corporations. There are many ways that that can be done, but that would be the overall principle. Individuals should have the same rights in relation to corporations as they have in relation to government. There's a lot more to say about that, but that's just sort of a framework about an analysis that we're involved in.
Okay.